Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with two very special guests. Our first guest today is Rabbi Simon Jacobson, and he's here to share with us his new book, Toward a Meaningful Life. Now, Rabbi shares emotional, psychological, and spiritual skills to help people live their most meaningful lives. An engaged sage with an open, empathic, and non-judgmental approach, he provides clarity, solutions, and new perspectives based on timeless teachings. So let's welcome to the show, Rabbi Simon Jacobson.
Thank you, Marianne, for having me. Pleasure to be here.
What an honor it is to have you here and to talk about your new book, especially in the new year. I mean, I think it's a book that everyone is kind of searching for. It's like, how do I find meaning in my life?
Absolutely. You know, we get so caught up with survival and the routines and patterns to just make ends meet. And we sometimes forget the core and essence of everything is why are we here? Like a business has to have a mission statement, so does every individual. Like, what is your calling? I often ask people, like, who are you? And they give me their business card. And I say, that's what you do. It's not who you are. And some people sigh and say, okay, well, you know what? I've been doing this for so long. What I do has become who I am. When really it should be the other way around. Who you are should define what you do. So yes, meaning, purpose is always the hub upon which everything else should be built. But that takes work in this, materialistic world that distracts us. And we sometimes forget about that core truth.
Well, I think right now, especially, after we've gone through so much and continue to go as a civilization through so much, people are asking these deeper questions. Like, who am I? Who am I truly? And before, you're so right. I mean, everyone would really kind of identify by, being the mom that does this or the person that does that or the salesperson that does this. And to get to the point of who you really are, I mean, I think sometimes people don't even know how to answer that question.
Absolutely. I would even go further. I think we're not educated. Our school systems and even our homes really don't train us to think that way. We are essentially reacting to circumstances instead of being proactive and beginning. That's why I use the example of a mission statement, because I think it's an excellent example. You start a new business, you start a new entity, a new organization. The first question you have to ask is, why am I doing this? What purpose, what mission is it fulfilling? And then you begin to develop a plan. How will I realize that mission? And in our personal lives, it goes the other way around. We grow up and we're taught, at best, a good education will teach you great tools. And so you have a very powerful tool chest. But then you say, okay, how am I supposed to use this hammer or this screwdriver or mathematics or physics or science or history or political science and so on? And when you don't have that destination, that vision, that mission, it becomes really a bunch of fragmented different activities that initially doesn't seem like much, but it's really not driven by a deeper calling. It's, I think, part of the blessing of our generation with all our prosperity and comforts also has this other side that we become complacent, and then we become essentially what I like to call a more survival-centric life instead of a goal-centric life. And what you said is absolutely accurate. During this pandemic, I think things have changed dramatically because once people's security blankets and comfort zones have been disrupted, so that usual restaurant you go to or a sports event or theater or summer plans, now winter plans, travel, all those crutches, so to speak, are not that available. And I personally see from my own work tremendous void and vulnerability, people seeking, okay, you know what, how am I going to fill my time? I don't have those go-to distractions. You can even call them addictions in some way. So in many ways, for many people, this has been a big wake-up call for the good. I wish it wasn't with pain and loss and death, but a wake-up call that shakes up our comfort zones is always healthy for growth.
Yeah, my goodness. And I love how you start your book off. I mean, one of the first areas that it talks about is what is a soul. And I think a lot of people are experiencing this right now where they just have no idea why they're bursting into tears or have deep sadness. And I found that what you talked about in your book about that was so profound.
Yeah, I remember actually one of the editors at Simon & Schuster, who was the editor of Kirk Douglas, who passed away recently. Kirk Douglas had a stroke, and he was he would be crying all the time. Someone gave him a copy of my book. He writes about it in his own biography, his book called, I think, Climbing the Mountain, something like that. And he writes he used to cry uncontrollably. And then he read in my book this line, "Have you ever cried for no apparent reason? This is the voice of your soul, seeking, hungering, thirsting for something." And it began a big journey for him in discovering his soul. That's the sad reality, Marianne. Look, people wake up in the morning. Your body tells you, I'm hungry, I'm tired, I need exercise. But very few respond to the call of the soul, which is much deeper and more subtle. And frankly, even more important, because it's really like exactly what soul is. It's the soul of your life. It's the soul and purpose of your life. I mean, just imagine, I often use this example when I speak to different audiences. I said, imagine you want to write a book. And what do you do first? Do you start writing chapters with no idea where you're going? Or do you first think of a plot or some type of storyline or a narrative? And then you begin to develop it and write it out. Most of our lives are not done that way. We just live in the moment. And yeah, we may have business plans. We may have, I want to buy a house. I want to buy a second house. I want to buy a car. I want to travel. But the deeper existential and the deeper transcendent needs of a person, we just live in a generation that is not focusing on that. And things have changed now recently, but I hope that we never forget that important, because frankly, that preempts most challenges in life will be preempted. That the emptiness, the vacuousness, the meaninglessness of things is obviously preempted when you do have meaning and purpose and passion.
What if you have people I'm sure you have people that come to you all the time saying, you know what, I have no idea what my purpose is, and how do I find it? How do I find my purpose?
The $1 million question, yeah.
Yes.
I actually developed recently a course called Discovering Your Personal Mission because of this question. So to put it briefly, I'll just give you a little formula here that I think all your listeners and I think everyone can benefit from. At the end of the day, discovering your mission is really discovering yourself, like your voice. And if you don't know yourself well, like let's say you're very good at handwork, you're a good carpenter, or you're good at artist, but you think you're a great, executive director, and you could spend half your life doing something you're not even good at. So I think a big part of finding a mission is also finding yourself, knowing yourself. So I have this formula, which may sound a little cute, but it actually works. I call it the POP formula. That POP stands for personality, opportunities, people, places, plus passion, your passion, plus higher calling equals your mission, which means if you're able to identify the clues that are given to you in your life, identify your personality. Are you more cerebral? Are you more emotional? Are you creative? Are you action-oriented? They're very different type of personalities. Some are far more social. Some people are far more behind the scenes. So personality, and then opportunities that have come your way in life. Each of us has our own set of opportunities. The people we know and the places we've been to. Then find a passion, something you're really passionate and excited about. And then the final most important thing, it can't be about you and you alone. Every good mission statement is always about the greater good. Even businesses, even for-profit businesses, Google's mission will be, their mission statement is organizing all the information in the world and making it readily accessible. It's always serving a need. Obviously, they want to make money, but there's always that element. So including that type of higher calling, working backwards, passion, and then the four things, personality, opportunities, people, and places, that is going to be the beginning of a skeleton or a framework of finding your mission. And if you apply yourself to that, you really can do it. But it's going to take introspection. It's going to take looking into your life and discovering the things that really are your strengths and focusing on them and trying to actualize them. Now, just to use an example, I use myself as a I don't want to call it a guinea pig, but I'll just use myself as a case study. And that is, as a young man in my teen years, I realized I had the natural art of communication, even though I wasn't good at it, but I felt driven by that, writing, communicating, interacting with people. I had a good psychological insight into things, and it became my mission. Till this day now we're talking 50 years later, I'm still jump out of my bed in the morning, excited to take on the day, seize the day, and fulfill my calling, trying to use my skills to make the world a little better place.
Well, I think you're definitely doing that by helping people in such profound ways that you are being able to kind of just move through this life, because sometimes it could be, it could, especially now, we've got people who are afraid, who are anxious, who are depressed. When we look at all that, how are some ways that people can overcome these type of things that show up in life?
Well, just as a segue, look at you, Marianne. You're doing this show. This can reach potentially who knows how many people. You're using your skills in your interviewing skills to do what? To try to bring people a message of hope and strength and courage. I would just suggest to anyone listening to this, the best defense is offense. Instead of fighting depression or listlessness and aimlessness and emptiness, the key is to find something you believe in. And it could come down to a simple thing as this, making a call once a day or making several calls to people and saying, hey, how you doing? Or sharing via email or social media a nice inspirational thought that came your way. And it's just the press of a button. But I find there's so many easy things you can do that put you into the driver's seat, so to speak, where you are bringing warmth and light to others. That, to me, as simple as it sounds, can be a tremendous tool to counter the negative forces that settle in when we're just like not doing anything. Because nature abhors a vacuum, and so does the human condition. A vacuum means you're sitting around, bored, depressed, what's going to happen, pandemic, lockdowns, the schools, my children, and all that stuff going on. And the opposite of that is saying, no, today's a new day. I'm going to sit down with myself, my loved ones, if you have children, with your children, and say, let's make a project for the day. We're going to reach 10 people today with some type of positive message. And small things like that change your attitude. They used to say, there's an expression, they say, as your neurons are fired, that's how they get wired. You think positively, and then your being becomes a positive one. People say, if positive things happened in my life, I'd be a positive person. And I would respond, do positive things, and then positive things will happen in your life.
Gosh, that's so important, because a lot of times people are waiting, for maybe opportunities to just show up at their doorstep instead of going out and creating them. It doesn't take much to reach out to people, and it makes such a huge difference.
It's also empowering, because when you are on the receiving end, like in a sense, you're almost saying, I can't initiate it myself. I can't generate. As soon as you generate by initiating, by reaching out, by being proactive, it builds your own self-confidence. You say, you know what? I could take a leap. It may not be perfect, but I'm not waiting for something to happen. My father was a journalist, and he used to always tell me there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. So I think we should all be people who make things happen. That changes everything.
I think so too. I really, my goodness, your book has so much great information. You really dive into what is love. Why did you decide that was real important, especially now?
Well, we all know love is like perhaps the essence of all of life. What would we be like without love? As children, look at children that are unloved or don't have someone to love them. Love is like oxygen and water for our souls. Really, nothing less than that. And so number one is the driving force that really shapes who you are. When you're loved unconditionally, especially in your early formative years, you grow up more confident, more secure, more ready to take more risk, able to trust, able to build your own relationships. And of course, the contrast is also true. When you're lacking that, it's like a flower without water, it withers. We start second guessing ourselves. We don't feel that confidence. It's hard to trust. So that's number one, Marianne. The love is like essentially like the essence of what makes us tick. Number two is, think of it this way. If each of us were more loving people, what kind of world would we live in? With all this polarization and all the frustrations we're having, it's and the cynicism around politics and power. I don't know who coined this, but they coined when the world when the power of love will be stronger than the love of power, the world will change. So I really see love, and maybe it's the naive side of me, but I don't want to let it go. The idealistic side, and I say that half jokingly, because I really believe that love does make the world go round. And whenever you see love, you see growth, you see things thriving and flourishing. And when you don't, you can rest assured there's going to be some collision. So, I mean, I can't overstate the case for love. What do you think?
I agree with you 100%. And I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think especially now, so many people, we feel so divided as a country and just as a people. And I have friends in different countries that are, having similar polarizations in their countries as well.
Right.
And it's interesting, when you talk about love, is that what you feel is like the bridge that will gap and heal our nation?
Yeah, and it begins with loving yourself. I think when you don't love yourself, it's hard to love someone else. And I don't mean arrogance. I don't mean self-love in the narcissistic way. I mean self-love is respecting yourself. I always tell people there's the arguments in this country that have literally turned friends against each other. People don't speak to each other, whether it was around the politics of the last 4 years or the elections or other stuff. And I said, 1 second, I have brothers and sisters. I love them dearly. I disagree with them in many ways, adamantly even. Why does disagreement have to turn into hate or personal attacks? I just don't understand it. It's very disturbing to me. I mean, I understand it, but I mean to say it's like it doesn't make any sense. Why do I have to be wrong for you to be right? Why can't we just have an intelligent conversation? You know what? And we can disagree. That's what intelligent people do. They disagree, but they don't completely invalidate another person because you disagree with them. And I don't understand why it spills over into the personal. My psychological analysis is because people are not really that secure with their position. Because I grew up around people. When you're very secure in your position, you have no problem coexisting with someone who has a different opinion. It's when you're not that secure where you feel you have to basically destroy the enemy, so to speak. They have to be wrong for you to be right. And it's just a painful chapter. But I believe that if a few of us and many of us on a grassroots level can turn the tide by saying, no, we can disagree, but we're not going to allow it to affect our personal relationships. And I think that's where we need to head. And I think most people want that. Let those that want to fight, let them be isolated and let them fight it out. But why should the rest of us have to be victims to their need to wrestle? And I think the media, frankly, has also allowed itself, whether for commercial reasons or some other reasons and other agendas, have many ways. And I speak on both. I'm not speaking politically here on one side of the aisle, on all sides. I think it's become very partisan and it's turning people off. You don't have these objective voices where you can say, you know what, let me just hear two sides of the argument or something like that. So there's a lot of forces that are contributing. And with this whole mass media today and everything is amplified and so quick, it just creates a far more acute situation and much more difficult to unravel. But look, I enjoy conversation with you now because hopefully many people will listen to this. And maybe this will give them plant the seed to start thinking differently, especially teaching our children to be far more tolerant. When I say tolerant, I don't mean to be more compromising necessarily, but tolerant, being able to hear different opinions. That's how we expand our minds. I grow from people who disagree with me, not from those that agree with me. That's how you grow. You listen to another perspective, you learn from it, and you adapt it, and then you sometimes change your mind. Sometimes you just develop a new perspective on the whole topic.
Yeah, that makes such a difference, too, when you're able to actively listen to another person saying and not get emotionally charged by what's happening. You can just listen, take in the information, agree or disagree, And, it doesn't take away from them, listening,
Yeah. I mean, I in the mystical teachings, there's a beautiful concept that defines the word beauty. That beauty is harmony within diversity. You listen to any beautiful symphony, or you look at a exquisite piece of art, anything that we consider beautiful, a beautiful face, there's never one dimension. It's not like a beautiful nose or eyes. It's not one musical note. It's not one color. It's when you have that diversity, and then you create a harmony within it. That's when you have beauty. It's a tapestry of different colors and hues and sounds. And that's what I love really about all human beings. Each of us has our particular note song to play. And if we could see ourselves as part of one cosmic symphony, each one complementing the other and each one necessary and indispensable, that is really the secret to it all. And it's really, I just define in a way my own mission, actually, what I try to do and achieve. But who could disagree with what I just said? Because we all have, it's beautiful diversity. It's when diversity turns into divisiveness and into conflict. But diversity itself, put into the right order, you will create the most beautiful and exquisite art, music, and the same thing with the human race. Whenever you see people really working well together, that's exactly what you're seeing. Diversity, different approaches, different opinions, different strengths, different talents, but all coming together.
I think that's so beautiful. I love hearing that because it's all of our differences that make us so special and so unique in so many ways. If we're all the same, I mean, how boring would that be?
Yeah, besides being boring, it wouldn't be very, absolutely.
Well, I know that you work with many people who, face addictions, depression, anxiety. How has the pandemic really affected people struggling, with this? And what are some ways that they actually look at recovery now?
Well, on one hand, this pandemic and all its implications has brought out the best in many people because they dug deeper and are digging deeper to try to find inner resources. We spoke earlier about mission, about purpose. But unfortunately, there's also the other side. Let's say relationships that weren't in good shape as it were. Now with the pandemic, like I get calls all the time. People say, we couldn't stand each other till now, a couple, and now we're stuck with each other. It's getting much worse. So unfortunately, it's also causing some more acute issues. What I try to advise in all these situations is everything that happens can always bring out the best in you or can bring out the worst in you. I don't know who coined this. They say maybe Eleanor Roosevelt said it about women, that a woman's like a tea bag. You don't know how strong she is until you put her into hot water. You agree, Marianne, by the way?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. But I would like to see it as it applies to men as well, that when we're put into pressured situations, it could either bring out the worst or it brings out the strengths within you. So as much as possible, what we need to do is try to encourage people, hey, good, we're challenged, fine. We all understand this is a serious challenge to our health, to our economy, to our norms, to our standards, to our plans, our schedules. But this can also be a tremendous opportunity to become stronger than ever because you discover deeper resources. And if you look at it that way, I think it creates a far more positive approach. And one more point I would add is the issue of, you think you're in control of your life? No, we're not in control of our lives. We're in control of what we do with our lives. In other words, you can't control the events that happen around you, but you can control your attitude. You can't control suffering, but you can control your mind, how you will look at it. And that's how we have to be looking at our lives. Take control of your life and navigate. You know what a good swimmer is? A good swimmer is not someone who knows how to fight the storm. The difference between a bad swimmer and a good swimmer is a bad swimmer will fight the tide until they get exhausted and could end up being destructive, harmful. A good swimmer, they see a storm coming, they'll stop swimming. They'll let themselves go with the flow, be carried by the tide. And then when things calm down, that's when you begin to swim again. So it's about navigation and it's navigational tools. I have to say, I think all of us have been spoiled somewhat the last 60, 70 years since World War II, especially in the United States. We have not had real internal challenges. Yeah, we had 9/11, but something of this nature, and we've gotten spoiled. So now, when all those, as I mentioned earlier, our security blankets are stripped from under us, so what happens is you're left now with a tremendous opportunity. Find out who you are. I think it was Warren Buffett that said, not about this, but in general, that when the tide is out, you can see who's been swimming naked. So now, when the tide is out, dig deeper, find those strengths, find people that have courage and hope, and hang around them, learn from them by osmosis. Today we can do that online as well. The bottom line is you control your navigation. You control your attitude and approach. And you must work on that. To complain, why did this happen? Why did that happen? You can complain, but you're not going to change. The pandemic is here with us. We hope it'll be gone very soon. Vaccinations. But whatever comes your way, if it's a storm, you have to know how to swim. And sometimes you have to float and go with the flow. Sometimes you have to take a forward thrust ahead. And it's really learning how to navigate. That's the key to everything.
My goodness, what important advice that is. And I found your book, Toward a Meaningful Life, was so impactful for my life. I loved reading it, and I'm probably going to be rereading it again because it was a book that I feel like when you read it multiple times, you probably are picking up different things that really stick with you.
Yeah, look, when I wrote it, as you may know, as an author is really a channel. You write. You're the writer, but you're really trying to channel a wisdom that's greater than yourself. Because at the end of the day, the book belongs to the readers, not to the author. And you try to get yourself out of the way and try to take the pulse and get in touch with the challenges people face. And I think I did not a bad job, if I may say so myself. But it was really an effort of trying to get myself out of the way. It wasn't about sharing my personal experience, but almost like this is like timeless wisdom that can help you deal with the best parts of life and the more difficult parts of life. And that's what's resonated. Until this day, I continue to hear that. People saying to me, oh, these are truths that I always knew, but I wasn't aware of, type of thing. And to me, that's the greatest compliment because it means you touch that inner nerve, so to speak. And I think it's a lot about empathy. I don't know, you ever hear this line, Marianne? They say, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Yeah. I think when people feel that you care, it opens up a door between hearts. A heart speaks to a heart. A heart is reflected in a heart. I use a line, I think in the back of the book, words from the heart enter the heart. I'm a very big believer in that emotional intelligence that really connects us. Because you could philosophize and share ideas and concepts, and it's all brainy and cerebral. It's like playing chess. But when you touch a heart and you use your mind to help, so to speak, transcend our emotional subjectivity and connect to each other with care, it opens up unbelievable channels of blessings and clarity and just in general hope and a bright future.
And gosh, don't we all need a little bit of that right now, I mean, it's exactly where we need to kind of put our attention and focus on. My goodness, I mean, we could talk for hours. I just really appreciate the time that we're spending here together. Where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work and be part of your community?
Absolutely. Thank you for your kind words. So I have a website, which really is maybe a catch-all for everything. It's called meaningfullife.com. How do you like that? meaningfullife.com. There you can find, first of all, you can access me. If anybody has any questions, I'm accessible. Just write to me. We're on all the platforms, social media platforms, WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, YouTube. Secondly, there's a full calendar of events that have really been increased, especially in the last months due to the circumstances and the upheavals of our times, unprecedented upheavals, I should say. So please take advantage of different programming for different audiences on all type of platforms, whether it's text, like articles, or audio, video, you name it, short, long. And to me, it's the most sacred experiences to intersect, or we call cross-pollinate between kindred spirits and souls. As diverse as we are, we're all part of that one tapestry I mentioned. So again, meaningfullife.com, you'll find everything there. And I love to hear from everyone.
Well, Simon, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It was a great pleasure, Marianne, to be with you. You're very kind, great questions, and I hope it helps.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Toward a Meaningful Life. Again, if you'd like to connect with Rabbi, you can at meaningfullife.com for more information. His book, Toward a Meaningful Life, is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. So you'll want to stay tuned for our next special guest. The editors of the Jewish Annotated New Testament show how and why Jews and Christians read many of the same biblical texts, including passages, differently. On that note, we're going to pause here for a quick break. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. We'll be right back after these messages.
Internationally recognized and award-winning author Judy Goodman works and teaches outside the box of limited thinking. Working with people from every walk of life, her goal is to empower you to be the best you can be, no matter what the challenge is. Born with the gift of seeing beyond our normal vision, she has an extraordinary gift of working with every challenge. Teaching beyond conventional wisdom, her work is described as life-changing. Visit judygoodman.com. That's judygoodman.com.
There comes a moment when you realize you're somewhere special, when you discover that each beautiful creature that you see has been rescued from a life of absolute horror and brought to this incredibly free place. Here's where their lives were forever changed and where yours will as well. Discover over 500 tigers, bears, and lions at the brand new visitor center at the Wild Animal Sanctuary just outside Denver. For more information, visit wildanimalsanctuary.org. Discover true freedom at the Wild Animal Sanctuary.
Have you ever had the sense that your thoughts might actually be doing something? Ancient secrets of manifesting have been masterfully revealed in the award-winning book Manifesting 1-2-3 by Ken Elliott. For the first time, the author's experiences and stories in this book describe exactly how your thoughts can create anything. You've been doing this all your life, but it's never been fully explained for you until now. Visit manifesting123.com for more information today. Manifesting123.com.
Welcome back to Moments with Marianne. We're here today with our next special guests, amy-jill-levine and marc-zvi-brettler, and they're here to share with us their new book, The Bible with and Without Jesus, How Jews and Christians Read the Same Stories Differently. Esteemed Bible scholars and teachers, AJ and Mark take readers on a guided tour of the most popular Hebrew Bible passages quoted in the New Testament to show what the texts mean in their original context, and then how Christians and Jews over time understand those same texts. So let's welcome to the show AJ and Mark.
Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. Glad to be speaking to you.
You know, what an honor it is to have the both of you here. And I have to ask, what inspired the two of you to write this book?
I guess I'll start. Mark and I worked together for two editions of the Jewish Annotated New Testament, the first one that came out in 2011 and the second in 2017. We work really well together. It's great fun. He doesn't let me get away with anything. His strengths complement my strengths, and he's usually on another continent. So right now he's in Jerusalem and I'm in Nashville. So we can't yell at each other, but we can certainly communicate with emails. And when we finished the Jewish Annotated, particularly the second edition, we thought there's more we want to say. There's more we want to say to Jewish readers about Christian texts and Christian readers about Jewish texts. And we want to do it in a way that models civility rather than the polemic and the rancor that sometimes marks interreligious conversation.
Oh, isn't that the truth? I mean, because a lot of times it's met with such kind of animosity that, it's interesting. We don't really get to dive into what some of the differences are, because a lot of this, makes sense and is very important to understand. And as you were involved in the writing of this, Mark, was there something that really stood out for you with the research that was done that you're like, wait a minute, this is new. We have to share this?
Well, a whole lot of it was new to me. So I'm predominantly a scholar of the Hebrew Bible. I came to study the New Testament later. So it's really easy to study the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament without studying the New Testament. On the other hand, AJ, who's predominantly a scholar of the New Testament and early Christianity, well, the New Testament is a larger part of the Christian Bible. The Old Testament is first. So she knew all of this Old Testament stuff. So a lot of the material concerning the New Testament was new to me. A lot of the material concerning the early church fathers was new to me. And it was really wonderful to expand my knowledge in this particular way.
Right. You can't do the New Testament unless you know what the church would call the Old Testament, the church's Bible, part 1. But you can read the Old Testament or the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, or the Hebrew scriptures, if you want to call it that. And we actually debate what to call it. You can read that without any Christian lenses whatsoever. So what we thought we could do in this book is say, if you read the text through Jewish eyes, whether it's Genesis or Isaiah or the Psalms, what do you get? And if you read it through the lens of the New Testament, what different readings do you get? And to argue that it's not a zero-sum game, it's a model of the lenses through which you read.
Yeah, so to go back to AJ's image, it's all about lenses. So for me, writing this book, I really learned to see the world in a new lens, through the Christian lens. It is not my lens, but it is a lens that I've really grown to appreciate and to see the importance of it very, very much.
Right. It's not my lens either. Mark and I are both Jewish, and we're not Messianic Jewish. We're just Jewish. And we've sometimes heard from our friends in the synagogue or in the Jewish community that, how can Christians possibly see Jesus in Isaiah or see a Trinity in Genesis? And part of what we want to do here is show the logic of the Christian reading. So it's as well as the logic of Jewish readings that sometimes don't read exactly the way the Hebrew does, but play with the text.
So I think I'll start with you, AJ. My goodness. Okay, there's so much information here I have questions on. We'll start here. So, your book just really it launches off talking about interpretation. Was there something that you discovered, as you're doing this research, going, wait a minute, this interpretation's totally different than, what it is, in Jewish text?
Right. And even more than that. So if you take what's sometimes called the suffering servant in Isaiah, and Mark and I aren't really happy with that term, but it's become sort of dominant. The Christian reading is, that's clearly speaking about Jesus. And the writers of the New Testament clearly thought it was speaking about Jesus. But if you look to Jewish sources, you can come up with 10, maybe even 20 different identifications of that servant. So one of the things that we find is that Christian readings tend to foreclose interpretations of the Christian Old Testament. It must be pointing to Jesus. Everything points to Jesus. And Jewish readings tend to open them up. The text can be interpreted in a myriad of different ways. So how do you balance out these interpretations? And one of the things we're able to discuss is why Christianity tends to narrow interpretation and why Judaism tends to expand interpretation on the same verse.
And I really hope one thing that we did, AJ twice used the word clearly in her previous comments. I hope that will really show our readers that there is no such thing as clearly, that the texts really are open-ended in fundamental ways. And it's important to lose the blinders that we may have that are part of our religious traditions, and to see more clearly by seeing more broadly.
Right. So each chapter takes a particular text from the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament, the Tanakh, tries to determine what it would have meant in its original context. And here Mark's expertise in knowing that context was so extraordinarily helpful. We show how it's read in the New Testament. And then we look at other branches of Judaism to see how it was being read, for example, by the Dead Sea Scrolls, if they mention it, or early Jewish historians like Josephus or philosophers like Philo. And then we go into rabbinic literature, post-biblical Jewish literature, and even early medieval Jewish literature to see how is that text, which Christianity has so constrained to point to Jesus, but done so in a remarkably ingenious way, to show how else Jews are reading this, sometimes in polemic with the church, sometimes off in their own devices. And every chapter ends, in effect, with an invitation to the reader saying, now that you've got all this detail, what's your interpretation? How can you add to that magnificent stream of interpretation?
I love that. I mean, you bring so much wealth to this discussion, both of you. I mean, it's just a joy to read this book. And I found it very fascinating, even talking about like the interpretation of different words, how meanings can really change the story. And I would love for one of you to just kind of share your thoughts on that.
Sure. So let's start with the very beginning of the book of Genesis, where in Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, I'll just give you the Hebrew, where you have Ruach Elohim mirachefet al pnei hamayim. You have the Ruach of God hovering on the face of the word. Well, Ruach in Hebrew has a range of meanings, as does the Greek equivalent in the Greek Bible and the Septuagint, pneuma, and they have a very similar range of meanings, meaning both a physical wind and a spirit. And already at the beginning of Genesis, so what is happening here? Is there a very prosaic wind, like what is blowing outside here in Jerusalem right now at this very moment, over the face of the waters, and the water is roiling from this wind? Or is it something very different, meaning a spirit of God? And there are different certainly within the Hebrew Bible, the word ruach can mean both wind and spirit. And there are different pushes and pulls in both directions for what the text means originally, although I think I'll stick with a prosaic meaning of wind for the most original meaning. But nevertheless, because the word is so multivalent, it has all these different meanings, that has opened up different interpretations, both in the history of Jewish interpretation of the text and Christian interpretation of the text, where for most Christians reading it, the Spirit is certainly going to be, part of God or part of the Trinity, while for Jewish readings, that is going to be a rather unlikely sort of reading.
Another way of looking at it, and I love how Mark just starts at Genesis, because really Genesis 1:1, we have to fight about exactly how to translate that opening verse. The Hebrew letters YHWH, which become that sacred name of God, sometimes comes into English as Yahweh, although Jews would never pronounce that liturgically, gets translated into Greek as kurios. So listeners may have heard of like Kyrie eleison, and it means Lord. You can remember it because Lord has 4 letters and YHWH are 4 letters. So when you read that in the New Testament, when Jesus gets referred to as kurios, Lord, is that an evocation of the name of God from the earlier scriptures, or it just means Lord, like lords and ladies or sir? So that one term opens up to quite prosaic and quite profoundly theological interpretations. And it's a choice for each reader to determine how is that word being used in this specific context.
Wow, that's pretty profound. Yeah, I was looking, when I was reading your book, you even talk about like how punctuation changes everything too.
And there's no punctuation in that early text, so we have to put it in.
Yeah, I mean, there's no punctuation. And again, something that I hope your listeners will become more aware of. Until the 13th century, the Bible didn't even have chapter numbers or clear divisions between chapters. So one of the things that we really need to do as interpreters is to decide where a unit begins and where a unit ends, where a sentence begins, where a sentence ends, where a phrase begins and where a phrase ends. And I'm sorry, I just like this example too much, but the difference between let's eat grandma and let's eat, grandma is very, very profound. And you have tens of such cases in the Hebrew Bible where the difference in punctuation is extremely significant.
And in that case, the Jewish tradition may take the verse in one direction and the Christian tradition may take the verse in another, and they're both right.
Yeah. And the classic example, which we talk about, is do you have in Isaiah chapter 40, a voice calls out, in the wilderness, which is the predominant Jewish tradition of the way of reading it? Or do you have a voice calls out in the wilderness? And then you have a colon after that, which is the way in which the New Testament takes that verse from Isaiah chapter 40. That really makes a difference.
Right. And the Dead Sea Scrolls actually allow for both readings.
Yeah. No punctuation yet.
Oh my gosh. I was about ready to ask about that. Your thoughts on the Dead Sea Scrolls.
They're fabulous for a variety of reasons. But one of the things they tell us is a little bit about the instability of some texts, where you have different versions of the same text, because we don't have printing presses yet, and the scribes are out there doing what they want with the copies that they've got. The Dead Sea Scrolls also even raise the question of what is considered to be sacred scripture, or what's canonical. They never give us a copy of the book of Esther. Did they just not think it was worth reading? Or did we miss it somewhere and it will surface in some cave later on? They give us different versions of the same text. And then they give us a war scroll, a scroll of hymns, additions to text, commentaries on text, and so on.
Yeah. And just to add two things to what AJ said. They're super important because they indicate a pluriformity of biblical texts, or what would become biblical texts in the late Second Temple period. So very often people would say, oh, the New Testament is misquoting the Hebrew Bible or the Tanakh or the Old Testament. That's a very strong claim, and that probably is not the case. Very often the New Testament, which may read differently than the Old Testament does when it's quoting a verse, may simply be quoting an alternative version that existed then. The other thing I just want to say, because so many of your listeners may be thinking about this, it is very clear that the Dead Sea Scrolls never refer to Jesus and never refer to John the Baptist. Those claims are often made. Those claims simply are false. The Dead Sea Scrolls offer very, very important evidence, as do Philo and Josephus and some of the very early rabbinic texts, of what Judaism looked like at the time of Jesus. Thus, they offer Jewish background for the New Testament, but they never refer to any of the figures who are mentioned in the New Testament.
And to make it more complicated, the scrolls also attest to two messiahs, the major one of whom is a priest rather than a Davidic king.
Well, won't that just make your head spin, you know? I mean, there's so much fascinating information there. And you even have a chapter that talks about an eye for an eye and turn the other cheek. So why are those so important that we understand what's going on there?
Well, I mean, because we look at contemporary applications of these texts, eye for an eye is very frequently cited in polls when American citizens are asked, do you support capital punishment? And the answer is yes, because an eye for an eye says so, so it's biblical. And there are so many problems with that particular view. The eye for an eye, which shows up 3 times and is somewhat oddly placed, which we discuss in the scriptures of Israel, was not designed to, let's go maim somebody who then maims you, or kill somebody who then kills you. To the contrary, it does 2 things. First of all, it prevents escalation of violence. You chop off my finger, I chop off your arm. And the other thing that it does is provide legal equalization. So that if you look at the comparable Code of Hammurabi for the Babylonian law codes, the Code of Hammurabi says that the eye of a lord, the eye of an upper class person, is worth more than the eye of a peasant. So for an eye just says we're all in the image and likeness of God in effect, so they're all equal. But we never see in the text anybody actually implementing this thing. And when we finally get up to rabbinic literature, where we start getting the commentary on it, the rabbis make it, to use the term clear, but here they're crystal clear. You can't do an eye for an eye because no 2 eyes are the same. I have terrible eyesight. So if you have 20/20 vision and I have 20/600, if I took out your eye and you then took out mine, I've taken a whole lot more from you than you have taken from me. And as one rabbi put it, if I put out your eye and I'm blind, what difference would it make? So therefore, rabbinic Judaism says if somebody engages in an act of physical mutilation, you actually lose a limb, then there has to be some sort of monetary compensation for pain, medical expenses, loss of work due to injury, and so on. And when we get to the New Testament, where Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, you have heard it said an eye for an eye, but I say to you, if somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other. What Jesus winds up doing is changing the subject, because there's a huge difference between losing a limb and getting a backhanded slap on your cheek.
Yeah, that sounds like that is a huge difference there. It brings that 2 together, where I think a lot of times people look at that and there is this discussion on, hey, it means the same thing, or should we turn the other cheek? And then, you get a lot of discussion in regards to almost like they're opposing phrases, like which one is right, when they're just separate phrases on their own.
Right. And they're both based on the same prompt, an eye for an eye. And both traditions say we cannot take this literally. Any more than when earlier in the Sermon on the Mount, when Jesus says, if your eye offends you, pluck it out, or if your foot causes you to stumble, lop it off. I don't think anybody's going to be taking that as literally that's what you need to do, or we'd be wearing eye patches along with face masks.
Yeah, that would be a whole different reality. So, well, and yeah. I know you guys also cover sacrifices in ancient Israel. Why was that important to put in this book?
Well, it's so significant because the central image of Jesus is Jesus as a sacrifice. So this is one of these cases where it is really impossible one of the many cases where it's impossible to understand a central tenet of the New Testament unless you understand the Old Testament background. So sacrifices were fundamental to at least certain groups within ancient Israel, and blood manipulation was central in at least one of those types of the sacrifices, which is sometimes called a sin offering, though there may be better translations for that. And thus, to the extent that Jesus is understood as in continuum with the Hebrew Bible, and Jesus is understood as the Lamb of the Lord, then that really becomes a central image for understanding what's happening within developments in earliest Christianity.
Well, also, you guys cover Passover in your text as well, and I really liked how you covered that, and love for you to expand on that for our listeners.
I'll start. Passover is and the Exodus story on which the Passover tradition is based. It is available for multiple groups to use to determine who they are, most in particular, African Americans who read the text in light of slavery and freedom and continue to do so, as have other groups. One of the ways the New Testament deploys the Passover material, and here I'm following up on Mark's comment, is in the Gospel of John, where at the beginning of the Gospel, John the Baptist says about Jesus, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And then it turns out as you go farther on into John's Gospel, Jesus is crucified at exactly the same time that the Passover lambs are being sacrificed in the temple. So what the Gospel of John does then is use this Passover imagery, but then Jesus becomes the Lamb of God. And at the same time, the Passover sacrifice, which is not a sin offering, can take on the trappings of a sin offering because of the use of that particular image. We also discuss how Passover is interpreted differently as we go through the centuries in Judaism. What happens in Judaism when there's no longer a temple where which you would make that paschal offering? Because in the year 70, the Romans burned down the temple, and that was the end of the Jewish sacrificial system. How then do you tell the Passover story? And how would Christians tell that Passover story, where instead of thinking so much about the Exodus from Egypt, the church will start thinking about Jesus as bringing people not from slavery to freedom in a physical sense, but bringing people from the slavery of sin to the freedom of grace. So how do the metaphors change?
And I don't want your listeners to think that I'm obsessed with blood, but the issue of blood also returns with the Passover sacrifice and with the whole image of Passover, because ultimately in Exodus chapters 12 and 13, the blood is put on around the doorposts and on the lintel of the Israelite houses so that the Israelites are saved. So again, we have the image of blood and saving, which becomes very crucial for early Christianity as well.
Right. And we do have to tell that's a one-off. It's not like Jews are continuing to do that every year. I mean, I think if we had to, we'd have to get a zoning variance in Nashville. In the Epistle to the Hebrews, which is in the New Testament, and it sometimes confuses my students, like, why don't Jews read this because it's called the Epistle to the Hebrews? Well, because it's in the New Testament. This text asserts that you can't have forgiveness of sin without blood. So a number of my Christian friends will suggest to me, gee, AJ, what do you do now that you can't sacrifice animals? Or, do you have to get special permission from the government to go kill a lamb every year? So one of the things we're able to do is to show how Jews understand issues of sacrifice, particularly when there's no temple in which to make a sacrificial offering, whether in the 6th century BCE or BC, if you prefer, when the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, or then in the 1st century of the Common Era when the Romans destroyed the temple. Jews don't claim that you require blood sacrifice in order to have freedom from sin. So here we can correct some Christian interpretations where the Christian presumes he or she understands what Judaism teaches.
And thereby to show that Judaism, like Christianity, is a dynamic religion. Texts are continually reinterpreted. And in the case of sacrifices, you have many rabbinic texts, which, for example, suggest that prayer has totally and completely replaced sacrifices and is just as efficacious as sacrifices. And I'm quite satisfied with that solution.
Right. And there's another one because, heaven forbid that Jews would come up with only one explanation for things. There's another rabbinic idea. It actually goes back to the Deuterocanonical literature, the Old Testament Apocrypha, to provide alms for the poor, to take care of the weaker members of your community is like laying a gift on the altar.
Wow. I am so glad that you guys took time to explain that. I really appreciate hearing that. And, it's interesting because there are also, I know you talk about in your book, examples of misreadings that have happened. People have kind of taken as heart, throughout the Bible. And there have been some examples that you had listed in your book of a misreading. And I'd love for you to share one of those with our listeners.
For the most part, I don't think we talk so much about misreadings as readings that do make some sense given particular lenses, but might sound very, very strange to somebody else. So when the Hebrew Bible gets translated into Greek, all translators are traitors because anytime you make a translation, certain terms go in that have nuances that are inappropriate and other terms go out where the nuance is needed. So rather than the term misreading, let's just talk primarily about alternative readings and then show what happens when those alternative readings are stretched. So is it, for example, a misreading to read Isaiah as predicting the conception of a child to a virgin? No, there's actually a grammatical logic there. it requires taking the text out of context. But that wouldn't be the first time or the last time that some later reader cited one text and ignored what came before and what came after.
Yeah, so how you read depends on the context in which you are reading a particular text, the historical context, the geographical context. And as these contexts change over time, texts are naturally read differently. Well, of course, from the original writer, this might be a misreading, or you might have a mistranslation. But the whole point of the book is that we should not be constrained by original meaning. We're not originalists, but rather we want to see the text as an opportunity, opening up many opportunities for different sorts of readings in different places and in different times.
Jews have always read multiply. Rabbinic Judaism says, Devar Achar, give me another reading. And Christians can double dip. There's a huge amount of Jewish interpretation where the Christian can look and say, yeah, that's a good reading of Isaiah, or that's a good reading of the Psalms, or that's a good reading of Genesis. So for the Christian reader to say, well, it points to Jesus, we say yes and rather than yes but. Take it as pointing to Jesus. Why not? Through Christian lenses, obviously it does. But then see what else that text means, because once you say it points to Jesus, that's not all the text does. The text remains alive for anybody who's willing to engage it.
And I want to pick up, as we come toward a close, on a word which AJ said, the simple word and to say that at some points, one of our editors at Harper's wanted to change the title of the book from the Bible with and without Jesus to the Bible with or without Jesus. And both of us had a fit, because this book is really about and rather than about or.
It's a book about respect rather than about polemic.
I'm so glad you shared that. My goodness. And it makes sense with, the perspective that you bring, to this book and to the discussion. What a profound, I just think it really opens for profound discussion here. AJ and Mark, my goodness, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work and be part of your community?
Well, I teach at Vanderbilt University, and my primary appointment is in the Divinity School, although I'm also in the Department of Jewish Studies. And if people want to see what I'm doing, they can always go to the Divinity School website and click on my name. And I have a Facebook page, but my daughter actually manages it. I don't know how to access it, but that's another way you can get to me.
And I have a Facebook page that I manage, and it is easy to find me through the Department of Religious Studies at Duke University.
Oh, my goodness. Well, AJ and Mark, thank you both so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much.
It's been my pleasure as well. Such wonderful questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you, AJ and Mark. What an inspiring discussion that was today. Again, the Bible with and without Jesus is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit moments-with-marianne.com for more information.